Here's why the announcement of a Toy Story 4 was so concerning. While Toy Story 3 appeared to be the end of a trilogy, Pixar still kept the characters around in tie-in material. First it was with Toy Story Toons, a mini-series of shorts that were shown before certain Disney and Pixar movies in theaters. They weren't spectacular or anything, but they seemed to offer just that extra bit more closure and reassurance that the film series may be over, but the characters are still valued. It was actually nice to see as they were dormant for most of the 2000s. And then we got specials. 2 aired on ABC in 2013 and 2014 respectively, putting Toy Story Toons to a premature end and making it seem like this was the way forward. Little holiday specials which, even if they weren't spectacular either, at least wouldn't drag down the trilogy. But then, out of the blue, Disney announced a Toy Story 4, and I was always skeptical about it. Pixar had entered a rougher area than usual. Their movies were making less money, getting a worse response from critics, and sticking in people's minds less. It seemed like Toy Story 4 and these upcoming Finding Nemo 2 and Incredibles 2 movies were just gonna be them trying to relive the glory days. Or make money, there was that possibility too. I thought they were content to leave it at 3, and they must have been too because production was a mess. The script kept getting rewritten and kept getting rewritten and kept having to accommodate for factors out of Pixar's control, like the death of Don Rickles. John Lasseter was called upon to direct it at first, then he was co-directing it with Inside Out writer Josh Cooley, but then Lasseter stepped down altogether in 2017, then got outed for loads of out-of-line behavior and left Disney and Pixar. That was even more of an emotional blow to me because his background and his struggle to make Pixar a success was a story that empowered me from a young age and made me respect animation as a job. But now I gotta live with the fact that he's quite a slimeball. And whether or not you want to admit it, Toy Story 4 would be worse without his active involvement. The movie was still getting revised, with as much as 80% of the script being thrown out in the last year of production. People were coming to touch it up and leaving with a negative view of Pixar's work environment. By the end, it had 8 writers credited. The earlier movies only had 3 or 4. Despite all this, it seemed to beat the odds. Critics loved it, Pixar fans weren't as hard on it as Incredibles 2 at first, and it became the highest grossing movie in the franchise as long as you never learn what inflation is. Everyone had something to say about the ending though. It was powerful, it put the whole series in a new context, and it's probably going to be ruined by Toy Story 5 now. Was Forky Asks a Question not enough? Was Lightyear not enough? When is Disney going to let them end the Toy Story with any semblance of satisfaction? By the way, spoilers for the rest of the video. Most everyone has seen the first 3 movies, so I didn't include any warning for them, but some people still haven't seen Toy Story 4, despite the impressive box office. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend doing so first. Doesn't mean I think it's that great though.
Trash? No, toys. They're all toys.
Trash.
It's been a while, presumably a year, since Andy's old toys have been integrated into Bonnie's room. However, Woody's gradually been losing a spot in the play sessions, and subsequently, authority in the room. He takes a gamble sneaking into Bonnie's first day at kindergarten, and helps her create a new toy out of art supplies, that being Forky, who's stuck in an existential crisis. Is he trash or a toy? Who cares? Road trip to the Grand Basin. There, the plot starts all over again, with Woody noticing Bo Peep's old lamp at an antique store, a toy he hasn't seen in 9 years. The Toy Story timeline isn't too complicated yet, but when we get to the ocarina, whoo golly. Bo is basically reintroduced for Toy Story 4, having to take a leave of absence in 3. Her roles have stayed the same, she's still Woody's boyfriend and likes to talk it out with him, but there's more action to her. Being out in the wild has morphed her into an action hero, saving lost toys and giving them a home on playgrounds. There's the flashback showing that she had become a bigger asset in Woody's rescue missions, so it's a shift that comes off naturally. Annie Potts' performance is a lot richer than it's ever been, but I still don't think she's any more interesting than previously. At her core, she's still a simple love interest, which makes it difficult to revolve a whole movie around her. So they don't. The focus is at first given to Forky, a plastic fork that becomes a toy after Bonnie makes it so. He's so much better in concept than in execution. I don't mind him much, but they pose some intriguing questions about what it means to be a toy, but don't answer any of them and have him totally okay with his role as a toy by the time he and Woody get to the Grand Basin. He's still very naive and slightly unworldly, so you can see they were trying to keep his silly personality the focus, rather than any deeper implications. I assumed he could also appeal to viewers from lower income families who can't afford big brand toys, or only children who have no hand-me-downs. His existence looks like an encouragement to get creative with what you can deem a toy. You can make 10 Forkies for $1, or beg for a $30 Forky toy. Note to self, forget the meaning of the word integrity. Bose made a few friends during her time in the Grand Basin, including Giggles McDimples, a choking hazard based on Polly Pocket and Little People. She's a cop, but doesn't do anything cop-like except wear shades occasionally. She's got some alright banter with Bo, but her role doesn't really go beyond that banter, then fulfilling her life's destiny of being a choking hazard. We've also got a few returning faces you never would have expected. We get to see Combat Carls that haven't been blown up. And Tinny makes his physical debut in the Toy Story universe. I've always wanted to see him interact with his replacements. You've got Duke Kaboom as well, voiced by Keanu Reeves, a Canadian daredevil turned into a toy that wasn't as impressive as advertised. He's my favourite addition to the cast, even if he's just meant to come off as a comic relief. He does more than Giggles McDimples. It seems the characters they really wanted to be the breakout stars were Bunny and Ducky, a pair of carnival toys attached at the hand who've grown tired of waiting to be won. It's driven them to madness, their imaginations warped by boredom. Jordan Peele and Keegan Mike Key play off each other well, as usual for their work, but it depends on the scene if those around them can keep up with their energy. Still, it's energy that the movie could do with, since a fair chunk of the action happens in an antique store. There you've got the movie's biggest threat, Gabby Gabby, a pull-string doll who's always had a defective voice box. So when she meets Woody, she hatches a plan to get noticed by the only kid who ever visits the store. I call her a threat rather than a villain, but at times, the movie wants you to think of her as such. She's got creepy ventriloquist dummy bodyguards, probably a dig at Woody's early design, and her plan to rip Woody's voice box out seems pretty threatening, but if she is a villain, I don't think she works on her own, and if she's not meant to be a villain, that's even worse. I'll explain what I mean when I get to it in the writing. Bonnie's parents were given a tad more personality, especially the dad. Their relationship with their daughter isn't too deep, it's just the occasional conversation, like between Andy and his mother, but their reactions to things are entertaining enough to feel valid. Bonnie's dad only exists to suffer. Dads aren't treated very kindly in the Toy Story universe, just look at Andy's. The owner and the customers of the antique store are also just sort of there for flavor. Nothing wrong with that, they just don't leave an impact. Some old Hollywood actors appear early in the movie as preschool toys that Bonnie's outgrown. There's a Mel Brooks one, a Betty White one, you get what they're trying to do. Make Tom Hanks feel old. You'd expect a Mel Brooks toy or a Carl Reiner toy to carry a lot more weight and interest, but no, they're just here to sound like old people.
Head to the middle. When the carnival leaves tomorrow, we'll hide right there.
Oh, no way. Stuff that.
Awesome.
Wanna know the reason I don't think a Toy Story 4 should have been attempted? This feels like one of those ABC specials stretched out to an hour and a half. Those were also largely set in insular locations where the outside adventure elements were less prominent, and they were mostly an excuse to see the toys in a new location and not much more. I swear, an antique store was mooted as a potential setting for one of these, but then someone had the idea to bring Bo back, the top management at Disney or Pixar thought that was worth a movie, merge it with some other carnival concept, and it became Toy Story 4. I wouldn't have had impossible expectations for this if it was just another ABC special, maybe a 45-minute one if they were really serious. An antique store is a great place for Woody and the gang to get lost in, but only for a little while. I love exploring antique stores at op shops. You never know what you're gonna find, but with enough wandering and digging, you might find something you're interested in for a good price. Pixar have a few of their trademark cameos crammed into one place, so they got the appeal of these places. Not as interested in them as me yet? Well, a few antique stores and op shops now sell DVDs. If you still aren't convinced, you've got a carnival for some variety. But the way they jump back and forth between the antique store and carnival 3 times makes the adventure feel stagnant. Not helping is the lack of cohesion in the themes here. Toy Story 4 tries to start a lot of discussions. Maybe too many discussions. There's Forky's creation and refusal to be a toy, which is sorted pretty early. Then there's Woody and Bo's relationship getting more fleshed out. We already knew they loved each other and that Woody respected Bo's input on matters, but now they're out in the world, learning more about each other and sharing an interest in helping toys. There could have been more depth though. They have a tiff when Woody's plan fails, but that's it as far as complexity goes. I get the sense they love each other, which is good, but not enough to validate the story's outcome. Another discussion they start but don't close properly is with Gabby. There must have been a real tug of war over whether to make her a villain, because she's depicted as such in the first half, but around the time she persuades Woody into trading voice boxes, they lean more into her being just a little misunderstood, stuck in a cabinet waiting for her Melody to pick her up. But I honestly don't feel satisfied with Gabby getting a happy ending, even if it isn't how she planned for it to go. At first glance, she's an off-putting toy only interested in her own sellability, and then they stick with that depiction for so long that you expect there's something else up with her, like she's got an evil plan to hold Woody hostage. Maybe I'm still cautious of her being a twist villain, but Gabby's more of a twist hero, and she's not much of a hero anyway. She asks for 2 things, gets one, gets the other in a roundabout way, the end. There's a nugget of a good idea to her background, how manufacturing defects in toys could be a metaphor for disabilities in humans, but her role of coercing another into giving up their ability for a trade makes that interpretation ring shallow. Apparently when she isn't effective, she's not so creepy after all. Sure, buddy. Gabby doesn't do it for me. I got more out of the backstory and arc of the comic relief heckin' wholesome 100 Keanu Reeves toy. You, sir, get my Reddit gold. How are the old toys integrated into this? Barely. It's ironic that they signal out Woody as the one Bonnie's playing with less, when Slinky, Rex, Ham, Mr. Potato Head, and Bullseye are given nothing to do on the road trip. At most, Jessie pops a tire on the RV, and Mrs. Potato Head helps with the fake navigation, but it's a tease to bring them over if they're going to be stuck in the RV all day, sitting on a table. Perhaps the death of Don Rickles had something to do with this. You hear him speak, but it's through non-situational dialogue they'd had laying around since 1993. And what's Mr. Potato Head if he hasn't got a specific and sassy comment? How good is Ham if he can't banter with Mr. Potato Head? They had a massive roadblock with Don Rickles passing, and that affected the movie for the worse. The only positive that comes to mind is that it gives Bonnie's toys a little more time to feel like part of the group. Trixie and Buttercup are fairly talkative and are fun in the aforementioned navigation scheme, but Dolly has not grown on me. She's there to take the leadership role from Woody without any consultation, and it's not given any closure because of the scattered stories taking up more focus. She just pushes Woody out of his spot, like he feared Buzzwood back in the day, and that's it. There's a few implications that Jessie's taking on that mantle anyway, so what's Dolly good for? But what about Buzz, Woody's best friend? He's the most active member of the plot apart from Woody and maybe Bo, but it feels like he's taking a back seat to the rest of the action. Not much chemistry between him and Bunny and Ducky is formed. After misunderstanding Woody's description of a conscience, he assumes the coloured buttons on his chest are the voice inside him telling him what to do. A bit goofy? Sure, but I wouldn't say it makes him any dumber than before. Toy Story 2 was his consistently smartest role, and even then he gets his friends to walk through busy traffic. But towards the end of the movie, as Woody and Bo have spent more time together, the voice clips start to tell Buzz to move forward and leave. Yes, it's about time I talk about the ending of this movie, where Woody separates from the gang to join Bo in the wild. This, I feel, was only done for an emotional response, and not because it could close out the story. Plus, there's a good chance Toy Story 5 will redact it. But even back in 2019, I could see what they were doing. They were trying to recreate the impact of Toy Story 3's ending, with only one movie of weak build-up, instead of 2 movies with strong build-up. Any attempt to say, okay Disney, seriously, this is the end, we can't continue after this, hasn't held up either. It's a little suspicious that Buzz makes the call by listening to his inner voice, an idea he got by misunderstanding a figure of speech, and Woody leaving Bonnie for Bo is a debatable move for his character. You can see the writers working backwards, establishing that Bonnie doesn't play with Woody much anymore, but that doesn't mean she'd be okay with him going missing. Andy made it clear that Woody meant a lot to him when giving him to Bonnie. This is less uplifting now, knowing that Bonnie wouldn't mind losing Andy's most valued toy, and he wouldn't even be in great condition anymore if she did keep him. A toy that's lost his purpose in her room? Sure, but it's jarring to see him be so okay with leaving Buzz and the rest of the gang just for Bo. Toy Story 4 leans heavily into Woody's self-appointed purpose, that being to save toys from unfortunate fates. He does that with Forky and Gabby, and Bo has a similar thirst for adventure. They put him in a tough spot, so this is something to debate. You can hate it, you can love it, but that's the ending they went with. And I'm not keen on how they went around it. It had a chance to be very powerful, but the movie's so willing to shove new ideas in there that it loses the focus needed to pull this off with flying colors. Maybe it's just because they made Woody's expressions too subtle in this movie. Hey, remember when Woody was the most expressive thing in the world? The animation in Toy Story 4 is very high effort, but I actually don't think it looks as good as Toy Story 3, or even 2. You're going to have to hear me out on this. What made those movies look so spectacular was their style, how they utilized toy-based color and designs to make a living, breathing world for toys. 2 was still pretty plastic-based, and 3's an expansion on the look of 2. This is the toys world just as much as the humans world. But in Toy Story 4, they're focused on making everything photorealistic, and it doesn't look right. I get that photorealism is the easiest way to flaunt new technology, and this had to prove that it was worth the money and effort to animate, and I'm not saying the animators did a bad job. I'm just saying that these picture-perfect looking locations aren't as immersive, vibrant, or memorable as they were in the past 2 movies. The lighting is a letdown. It's not based on mood, it's based on how realistic they can make the scene. They condense all the most vibrant lights into a few moments that don't say much about the mood of the location or what the characters are going through. The antique store being dark and black when we first swap in is fine, but the second time when it's more threatening, it's later in the day so everything's brighter and easier to see. Wouldn't orange or green have been a better fit to signify some danger? But look at how realistic the cat looks in the lighting. I don't care. That doesn't make me care about the cat. Scud looked terrible. He had GameCube textures and his movements were janky. But he leaves a stronger impression than realistic cat. The early movies tried really hard to avoid looking like tech demos. They knew they'd eventually age, but used what technology they had to benefit the story. The cat already looks uncanny when we see this slightly cartoony face they gave it, so making it look like this mind-blowing marvel didn't pay off. And it isn't essential to the story. You could have had Giggles McDimples in any danger, like getting stepped on or stuck behind a drawer. If the animators responsible for the cat are still proud of their work, more power to them. What I'm saying is that I prefer the less naturalistic look of the second and third movies. It's just a preference. Don't misconstrue this as Employee A Million doesn't like good animation. I do, but I think a lot of artistic flourishes were lost in translation between Toy Story 3 and 4. But not all the magic. There are some scenes I really like. The opening flashback to the day Bo left Andy's house is my favorite scene. It's good we got a little more of the time period between Toy Story 2 and 3, that first sign that things were changing and Andy and Molly could outgrow their toys. It's the scene that most resembles a classic Toy Story adventure, even if Andy doesn't look right in the new art style. The walk Woody takes with Forky, where he does a better job at befriending him. This is the closest the lighting gets to mimicking the attention to atmosphere in the earlier 2 movies, and it's quite nice to see Woody recount his first encounter with Buzz like it's a legend. Woody meeting Bo is a clever "why haven't they done this before" moment. The love between them is bursting off the screen, but they're still around humans, so they have to stay frozen. It's a small thing, but it left a good impact on me. Woody talking about when Bo was bought and how she helped Molly sleep at night is incredibly sweet. After hearing about that, it only made me appreciate her existence more. Everyone's got a good backstory except Gabby. It's wild. And you know what else is wild? Duke Kaboom conquering his past and making a leap Rajon could have never fathomed. That's enough positivity, time for the worst scenes. There's a lot I could have chosen with Gabby, but I have to home in on her persuading Woody to trade voice boxes. The way she uses Andy as a means to tug on Woody's emotions comes off as manipulative. Like, they used Stinky Pete as a basis for her character in moments like this, but didn't invert it. And I'm calling shenanigans on the final post-credits scene. Bonnie still apparently has Forky at the start of first grade, a whole year after her kindergarten orientation, and only then does she make a companion for him. I don't care how much emotional need she put into Forky, there's no way she kept a fork with art supplies on it for a whole year, much less in this good a condition. Another thing about this movie that's more disappointing than anything is that there isn't a new take on You've Got a Friend in Me. It's the same original we've heard in 2 movies already, and while Randy's new songs aren't bad, it still doesn't feel like this movie's got a musical identity of its own. Even less so than 3, which it also borrows the tactic of reusing as much old music as it can. This movie had a $200 million budget, but a large sum of that was to pay Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, and Andy Potts and have their voices in a movie that tries really hard to matter when it never needed to exist in the form it did. To reiterate, this would have made a good ABC special with some cuts, but what we ended up with isn't bad, but it lowers the value of the Toy Story brand. If they're just going to tag on another movie after the trilogy worked so well, then that's a slight bummer. If they're going to give Buzz Lightyear his own movie that ends up being an intentionally mediocre popcorn flick with a few Buzz Lightyear motifs, then that's a moderate bummer. If they're making a Toy Story 5 not learning to let it be, then that's a major bummer. Especially with even more voice actor departures. Ali Ermey and Estelle Harris are no longer with us, and John Ratzenberger hasn't worked for Pixar in years. With the whispers that it's going to feature Andy in a prominent role, people are already predicting that it's going to end with Woody and Buzz being given to his kids. And isn't it weird how the ending of a Toy Story movie is predictable now, when it isn't even going to be out for another 3 or 4 years? My predictions are less about the ending and more what they're going to add to Woody. I bet we're going to learn who his first owner was. If he was manufactured in the 50s and Andy had him in the 90s, that's a long stretch of his life we've never heard about. And I bet they're also going to flash back to the first Toy Story, but reanimate the chosen scene with their current hardware. It'll be more showing off, but I think it would be fine to get a little glimpse at what Toy Story would look like today. The original movie is still a groundbreaking treasure. The first 2 sequels are masterpieces in their field, and the 4th one was more than enough. I rank it as the weakest of the saga, but don't be shy if you think otherwise. Toy Story, to me, will always mean quality storytelling. It didn't make computer animation appealing just because it was computer animated. The story did the work in making it a compelling new medium for movies. Lightning then struck 3 times, and what a string of lightning it was. The way they all collectively tell a story about growing up, facing the change in the world, and staying compassionate for your friends is serendipitous. It all works better with toys than it ever could with people. I care about these characters and only want what's best for them, to be remembered fondly and loved by generations without needing to be cooped up in some museum. The newer sequels may threaten the brand's integrity, but in a way, the appreciation for Toy Story will always be there, for infinity and then some.
We'll be right back to Tiny Toons on Nickelodeon.
I'm watching Tiny Toons here on Nickelodeon.